the Dirt and FCA podcast presented by Netting Professionals. We have a fun one today. We're continuing our voyage in looking at Title IX, looking at it both celebratory and critically in a lot of different ways, and thrilled to have three coaches who I'm sure you all recognize with us. We have Jacquie Joseph, Cindy Bristow, and Carol Hutchins. Thank you all so much for joining. We're going to get into this because we've already been talking for like 20 minutes and didn't hit record. So we're going to get into this quickly and just go around the horn. And when I say Title IX, what do you think of? What comes to mind? What fires you up? And we'll go from there. But Hutch, let's start with you.
Well, Title IX is 50 years old, and we're about to do a celebration of the amendment. And it's important for people to understand why we got where we got. Title IX has nothing to do with sports. It was an educational amendment, and it was largely to help inspire women and give them more opportunity to get into university levels as students, as faculty, and at the high school levels. And back in those days, in the 50s and 60s, very few women even went to college, let alone were represented at the faculty level. And that was the basis of the whole amendment, was to increase participation of women in education. And obviously what came out of that was how largely underrepresented women were in sport, in federally funded institutions, which is all educational except for, of course, private schools, whether it be junior highs, high school, grade schools, and of course, universities. And it became a mass awareness that women didn't have opportunities. And as I say, I was in high school when the amendment passed. It's not like I ran home and said, whoa, now I get to play sports. I didn't pay attention to Congress any more than anybody else does these days. All right. But what happened was I never was a varsity athlete. I never played high school softball. We didn't have it. We didn't have athletics for women. We had GAA, girls athletic activities. We had friendlies where we'd get in the gym teacher's car and drive across town to play basketball against the local high school. And we'd all get in the car and she'd take us to McDonald's and we'd go home. We wore pennies. We taped masking tape numbers on our pennies so we could have uniforms. And it wasn't until in Michigan, 1974, 75 is when they actually had a high school state tournament for girls basketball. And it was put into the fall. We played basketball in the fall because and legitimately, I read it in the newspaper, so we can stay out of the way of the boys. And girls didn't grow up with these opportunities. Girls in high school didn't get many, there was a few. And what that law did was it demanded, it gave some teeth to the fact that you had to support girls' opportunities just like you did boys. It gave some teeth to it. And what happened over those next 25 years was to get the teeth really biting in, we had lawsuits, we had people fired, we had universities and high schools start dropping boys in men's sports because they said, well, we can't afford the women, and they blamed the women. And there was a backlash of men that blamed the women. And I just will finish with, we've only ever wanted the same opportunity as the boys. We didn't want more. I have three brothers. I just wanted to play all the sports they got to play. And nowadays, obviously, you see a much, much better representation of girls having that opportunity. That's what Title IX means in a nutshell.
Thank you, Coach. Cindy Bristow, what about you?
Well, I grew up in a progressive state, California, with a very progressive mom. And I remember when Title IX passed, Hutch and I are about the same age. And I remember my mom saying, why does it take a damn law to do what's right? And I think that still applies right now. And I remember my parents fighting to get us to just have a place to play ball, not at school, but through the Park and Rec department, because the Park and Rec director said, girls don't want to play, they can't play. And my dad was like, you're nuts. And that was the prevailing thought, that we can't, we don't want to, well, we aren't, and because we aren't. They thought we can't because we aren't. Well, we weren't because there weren't any opportunities. And as soon as there were opportunities, we flooded the gates. And you can look at the Olympics at all the events that men didn't think women could do because our hearts would frickin' explode. And it's ludicrous. And it's just a bunch of people deciding that half of the population couldn't and shouldn't and can't and won't. And they're powerful because they control the funds. The law was supposed to infiltrate that a little. And to Hutch's point, it kind of started getting animosity toward women because we were the reason guys then, like there was only so much of the pie and anything we got had to have come from them. And I don't know. It's still, the fact that we're still talking about it is absurd. Like it is absolutely absurd. But we're still talking about it because it's still not right. I'm at a mid-major. I mean, we're not talking big facilities. We don't have a restroom. But at the mid-major level, it's okay that baseball doesn't play double headers. They can stay a couple nights, 2 nights for 3 games. We can't. They said we can't afford the housing. Well, you can afford it for baseball, but then they'll go into this thing, well, that's how baseball does it. They won't change how it's done. They use that to justify, and they just will justify wrongs everywhere you turn.
Absolutely.
It's maddening.
Thank you. Jacquie, how about you? What are your thoughts?
I just, echo what they both said, but for me, I am still just shocked that decisions are made without some overarching conversation about fairness. Like, it just blows my mind that we still do that on a daily basis. And for me, fairness has always come down to, well, if it's so fair, then let's switch places. If it's fair, let's switch. We'll use the restrooms in the baseball dugouts, and you go pee in the porta johns. We'll play under the lights, and you'll play in the daytime. See how many fans come for a 3 o'clock game versus a 6 o'clock game, because they have lights and you don't. And on and on and on. It's mind-blowing to me that in 2022, with all of the smart people that know for a fact that all of these things that are all the positives that are derived from sport don't apply to another gender. I just don't get it. Forget the gender. Let's just take the gender out then and just do samesies. I'm still blown away that somebody in a meeting didn't raise their hand and say, should 33 men get a car and no women? I mean, or how about all these people get nutrition and these people don't? I mean, what in the world goes on in these meetings is beyond me. So am I grateful for the law? Well, I'm like Cindy's mom. Why do we need a law? But we do, to which not a lot of people follow. And if they do, it's begrudgingly, not like with a real sense of fairness and rightness. If I had a son and I had a daughter, it's not a stretch for me to think I would like to feed them the same. I would like them to both have a quality clothes to go to school. And I think that they ought to get to their events in the same quality of transportation. I just don't understand why that's so hard. But it is. And people are still losing their jobs over what I'm saying. They're still losing their jobs over just simply that. We're eating peanut butter and jelly on this budget, and they're eating lobster and steak. Anybody got a problem with that? It's mind-blowing to me, but it's the reality we're in. So, we got to keep the good fight up.
What's the good fight look like? When you think about it, Hutch, you've been fighting that fight for a long time. What's it look like? How do you win it?
Some days I wake up and say, we're losing the war. I think I said it this morning. It has been a long fight, and we have definitely won a lot of the battles, and it's improved our lot by far, but especially at the Power 5 level. our lot is definitely more improved. But you can look across the board and you look at the salary inequities across the board, and you go to a university level, which is where I spend most of my time studying. Across the board, the males and the men coaches make more in salary than the women, from top to bottom, whether head coach, assistant coach, second assistant, whatever. They have more resources available, whether it's an actual strength coach that only takes care of their team, which mine takes care of several teams, and the resources that go, they have a nutritionist that sits in their own weight room and so forth, and the support services that go with that. And as you go on and on, the fight looks like it just seems that we take better care of the men's needs. But they'll say, well, you're plenty taken care of. And this is true. I don't believe any of my people are starving to death, but yet there's a lot more meals being served to the other gender, period. And what does the fight look like? The biggest problem we have now with Title IX is not the law, it's the enforcement. There is no enforcement. There is nobody on that campus. There's a Title IX officer who spends all their time on sexual assault and harassment, which I think there's a discrimination factor in that as well. But there's very little time spent on reviewing and in-house equity reviews. And so the fight looks like forcing the issue, which is unfortunate, when a women's basketball player has to tweet out the disparity in their accommodations and weight room at a championship, or it gets exposed last year in our own NCAA championship that the women's, they're playing 3 games in a 24-hour period and well into the wee hours of the morning. And when it's exposed, there's always a reaction, because now we have women's basketball. Well, I'm certain, I can't wait to see the weight room they put out there next week. And, now they can call themselves March Madness. Who knew they couldn't? Did any of us even know they couldn't do that? And the equity reviews are few and far between. And even when the NCAA did their own equity review, they're the ones who hired the law firm. They're paying them. I think, I'm not certain how much of that is really coming out and why we're not getting all the information, like how much money is really being invested in our women's sports, who they continue to claim we don't make any money because you're holding us hostage, how we report the revenue and how we are allowed to go out and raise the revenue. Some of it is just knowledge, and we became a lot more knowledgeable after last year. We have to keep going in that direction. We need the NFCA to help continue with their own investigations. And but equity is, I met a very famous Title IX lawyer back when I was in college. She helped us with one of the first landscape creating lawsuits, Jean King from Ann Arbor. And she told us, the law only works if you use it. The law only works if you use it. And to put that back upon individuals to carry that torch is really precarious. It's not safe. It shouldn't be on just myself or Jackie or Cindy to fight a battle with their institution. And that's why it's been so important in our association that we have advocacy now and help. But it's also important that we all stick together with it. And as a conference, we need to stick together, as an association, stick together as we bring forth inequities that are still going on and ongoing. And honestly, the gap's getting bigger. If you look at money spent on men and women in Power 5 and in mid-majors, there's huge inequities in facilities, travel accommodations, it goes on and on.
I think the answer is sunshine and exposure. It's what Hutch just said. Change is not going to come from within. People are trapped, right? The way these institutions are set up, the people even in charge of these things are beholden to their boss, who's beholden to the president, except, AD and such. And they're not ever rewarded or paid for doing the right thing, because you never know, what those constraints are. So external sunshine, exposure, external pressure. And now we're blessed with the fact that everybody's got one of these, and we've seen the power of a picture now, and the players have the the power. And so for me, I think the issue is, how do you get, because here's the other thing to remember, normal people are appalled, right? We're institutionalized to the point where we think it's okay that we are treated less. It's just how it is. And I say we, meaning all of us in an institution, we're institutionalized, is like I say. But when you tell the story, I'll never forget the legislation that somebody thought was a good idea, titled Fruits, Nuts, and Bagels. It was my favorite, where you can just visualize the room where somebody said, you can give a player a bagel, but not the cream cheese. And you just can't make this stuff up. And everybody voted for it, and it passed, and then it got down to us, and we were all appalled until like normal people outside found out, and they were like, what? And of course it was undone in under a year. And so what's happening now is you see these massive changes happening in a very short amount of time. People are like, things that like would take years and years, and committees on committees, and then it has to go to a poll, and then we're going to review it back, now got changed in one photograph. All of a sudden, all those hurdles that they said we had to go through, none of them existed anymore. One photograph changed it all. So I think it's important that we engage the support of what I call norms, people that are not institutionalized and have power to change things, and continue to support the external oversight. Like even on campuses, most campuses have oversight, like board of trustees or board of regents or whatever. None of those people have a clue what's going on because they're kept in the dark for a reason. They don't have a clue what's going on because they only know what people give them. They're not doing any independent reviews or external audits. We need external auditors to shed light on what really goes on, in my opinion.
That was one thing that was interesting when talking to Margie Wright. I had mentioned the lawsuit, and she corrected me immediately. She didn't file a lawsuit. Like their institution was chosen for an external review from the state, and it all spurred from that. And then subsequently she did with lack of compliance, but the initial, and I didn't know that. And I feel pretty well versed, in some of those things. And so I think that's a really good point. How do you think we get there? Cindy, your point about the double header and the single game, there are 4 or 5 conferences right now that have contacted the NFCA, myself, and in the last several weeks of we can't move the needle. Like our conference is saying, no, baseball is doing it. We can't. So when you think about that, and that's a real life application on your institution, what are coaches supposed to do? What are student athletes supposed to do to be seen as equitable?
Yeah, it's, it's funny because you can look and go, oh, wow, well, everybody's got these big salaries now and these big stadiums, and just be happy with what you have. That's what the protagonists will say, like, just be happy with what you have. But the scheduling, like every little time that there is an opportunity for discrepancy, they take it. And scheduling is that opportunity. And I think to Jackie's point, pulling in the people within the community who we come in contact with, who would look at that with fresh eyes and go, that's absurd. And they can have contact. Maybe they're in a weekly luncheon. My brother is in a weekly luncheon with the chancellor of our university. And those kinds of, you never want to, I really guard taking advantage of that, but some people don't know what really is happening down on that micro level. They don't have any idea. They're inundated with all kinds of problems from the research department, and I don't know, whatever a chancellor occupies their mind with. It's not baseball, softball scheduling. And yet that just permeates the issue. And I think social media is a big, it's a big opportunity. I wanted to say weapon, but that sounds way too aggressive. But to Jackie's point, it was that picture of the pathetic weight room at the women's basketball national championship that changed the whole thing. That suddenly all the hurdles they couldn't jump over, they all jumped in unison over them faster than they have done anything, because it's the public shame they're trying to avoid. They don't really so much, this might be a very, this statement probably needs to come with a warning, but they don't care that they are doing it. They care they're caught doing it. Like that's the truth right there. And if they're caught doing it, well, then they'll change it because they're caught doing it.
That's going
And
to
they're
be in
not
Joanna's
changing
Twitter
it
in a
'cause
minute,
it's
just so
right.
you know. That's
Do
going
what?
on Joanna's Twitter, that statement. That'll be
Well,
the quote of the day.
I'm just trying
And
to
it's
see
the
if I can,
truth, sadly.
if I can tag Delta in that, if we're
You know,
gonna,
there's such a bias. It's implicit bias, you know, that, you know, athletic directors think they've got to spend the money on the sports that make money, yet how many of those sports really make money? And it kind of justifies the ends, you know, and they keep coming back to the women, you know, they don't really fill the arenas. We just had 12,000 in our basketball arena for our women's gymnastics. And, you know,
Well, they
didn't,
keep
we're in
moving
our 45th year.
They keep moving the goalpost. In my career, the goalpost was this, and then you achieved that, and then they moved it to that, and then you achieved that, and then you moved it to that. And they just keep moving the goalpost, and then they just use whatever criteria fits. One of their famous criteria is market value, right? Which is self-imposed and self-created to pay people that, I mean, it's like, it's ridiculous. And so then if you could just ever find out the criteria, then you could address the criteria, and then they just move the goalpost. And it just keeps going on and on and on. And, you know, somebody has to come in at some point and just want to do the right thing, because it's insane how much more money we spend on men than women in just my short career in terms of the length of sports. Like I haven't been, you know, it seems like I've been doing this forever, but I really haven't. But like budgets have increased by tens of millions and tens of millions, but the gap has just gotten nothing but bigger. It makes no sense. The gap just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's the part I'm just like, and then when we found out the nuances of how, well, you don't make money. Oh, guess what? You're not even allowed to make money because we took your property and packaged it with 70 others to make it more convenient, when had we been able to negotiate our own, we'd have made 4 times the money 10 years ago. It's just so convenient, the excuses and the arguments and the nonsense. And it just goes back to everything. Like you name it and I'll give you the story behind it. And it's just absolute silliness. You know, let's just start with this silliness. Well, football makes money. Okay. Here's the truth about football. Yes, they do. At 7% of the schools. So 93% of football teams lose money. Okay. It's just that big schools like ours make it hand over fist, but we set policy for everyone.
Well, you spend a lot also.
Right. But the accounting for these things is really pretty creative. So we're going to build them a performance center that the rest of us are supposed to be able to use, to which nobody gets in it except between 10 p.m. and midnight. And I'm not talking about just my school. My school, you know, we do some things well and some things we can work on, but I mean, across the board. So then why is it then there's this inequity at the school that football actually loses their ass? It's not, if it was a business, we'd be out of business. If we ran athletics like a business, we'd be out of business. That's how poorly these creative accounting techniques are used to justify a football team at a mid-major that loses millions and millions and millions being treated differently than another team that actually loses less. Well, then I think you should support the team that loses less. I mean, we have male teams that lose millions. It makes no sense. But like I said, it's a shell game. You just keep moving the shell, trying to find the ball under it, you know, or moving the goalpost. And there are people smarter, but there just isn't enough collective outside sunshine on it, because people would be just appalled. I think people would be appalled if they knew the truth.
Well, let's talk about facilities, because you talked about that a little bit. And I know Kenny Gajewski at Oklahoma State a couple of weeks ago had an article, and they were talking about how great this new Oklahoma State facility was going to be. And his quote was, "It's not good enough. It's not big enough. It's until," and they have 750 seats or whatever, "until it looks like that, the baseball stadium, it's not big enough." Hutch, you got seating issues. You got people coming out the wazoo for your games. Yeah.
We have been, first of all, we've been out drawing baseball. I mean, we have 2,500 people regularly at Alumni Field for years. They finally built Alumni Field in 2008 because we were getting over thousands of people before then. We've had a tremendous fan base, and we certainly could use more seating, no question. You know, and I was just down, let's just say I was at another school playing in the SEC just recently, and they have a pretty nice facility. I mean, I don't have any complaints with it, other than I went over to see their new baseball, their $54 million baseball field, begged to get a tour. I didn't quite get the tour I wanted. And I came back and I'm like, wow. There was no comparison in the facilities. And how do you justify that we need a $54 million baseball field? And this is a very successful softball program and a nice field that you're not going to go home and complain about. But it's just, it immediately sends the message of who's more important. They're celebrated at a higher level. They're supported at a higher level. They have way more technologies and support staff and all the things that goes with it, while we're all doing almost the exact same job. We're doing the same thing, same number of games played, same difficulties with weather. And it goes to the point of whether, you know, softball is always playing double headers, and baseball, you know, they just can. And a lot of it is the old school thinking from the old boys network. No disrespect, and there's some old girls in the old boys network. And just, this is the way it is, and they don't really challenge themselves with, why is it like this, and why does it have to be like this? And I talk about, you know, watching when we have seen baseball have success, and they all deserve what they get when they have success, but they're celebrated at a whole different level. That's all I can tell you. I've seen it personally, and as somebody who's been in a College World Series on more than one occasion, when I went and watched our baseball team in 2019 and was thrilled to death for them and celebrated with them and for them. But I walked into an environment there where our entire athletic department was there, as well as the Big Ten commissioner, who I'd never seen at any of the World Series that I had been in, which was in more than 10. Never had seen a Big Ten commish, yet he was the first person I ran into when I ran into the rest of our athletic department. And they're celebrated at a whole different level.
Here's what, let me tell you what happened too. It's like these architects, right? They saw this small field and then they made this small stadium. The stadium, the seating, the restrooms, the concessions, the parking, the facility should have been identical. But because the bases are smaller and the field is smaller, they just miniaturized it all, which makes no sense.
Well, a lot
on
of our
any
facilities
level
were built before, again, we were just beginning to draw crowds. We were just beginning to get on TV. And guess what? We're a pretty popular sport right now. TV loves us. People are selling out. There's nowhere to sit at regionals and super regionals for sure at any of those facilities. And, you know, I maintain if we put 20,000 seats into Hall of Fame Stadium, because Ameritrade's got about 20,000. When I was out there, they were not full to the gill. I mean, there were a lot of open seats. I bet we'd fill Ameritrade. I'll bet you.
Yeah, but even just on our own campuses, like you just said,
Yeah.
you know, it's like they built these fields and then they just put in, like, I'll give you an example, Clemson. I literally do not think they thought anybody was going to come to the game. They
They've
built
already
this
expanded
nice,
once.
they're gonna have to expand 2 more times unless they figure it out that a whole lot of people want to go have a beer and watch a softball game in nice weather the same way as they do at any baseball game. They could make money. It's almost as if they want to keep the expectations low so that they don't have to rise up to
They don't
them.
want to spend the money that it takes to put in 5,000-10,000 seats.
Yeah.
They don't want to spend the money. Expectations are not. There's like, that costs money. We're not spending that much. I mean, many an AD have been like, we're not spending that much on women's sports. I know personally of an AD who said, there's no way I'm going to ever pay my softball coach the same as I pay a baseball coach. And I can tell you that softball coach doesn't make what her baseball coach makes.
Right.
Well, we've seen that
Yes.
recently with an athletic director say that baseball coaches coach 9 innings, softball coaches coach 7.
Well, you know what? Let's talk about that a second.
Yeah.
Let's just talk about that a second. That's another one of those artificial goalpost moving things.
Yeah.
Because I would contend to you that we have rules that we shoot ourselves in the foot over, whether it's 9 innings or that godforsaken piece of shit 8-run rule that
We'll never do 5 innings again if we're going to get paid by the hour.
robs thousands of girls of more innings to play. If you play at Alabama or Oklahoma, you lose an entire season of opportunities to play simply because we won't acknowledge that we score more runs. I'm not saying get rid of it, but surely we could make it 12 or 15 to give Hutch a chance to put some kids in the game. Meanwhile, you have all these kids bitching about playing time, but the only time they can get in is when the score gets reasonably up there. You're up 5, 6, 7, 8 runs. And you know what? Oh, we have to stop. The girls can't handle the humiliation of losing by 9. Meanwhile, it's certainly fine for Nick Saban to beat every opponent by 60 points or basketball to win by 40 or 50. They don't stop playing, but
They don't stop baseball.
They don't stop playing. They keep going to allow girls an opportunity or allow people an opportunity to play. Like, somebody please do the math on how many innings we don't get to play because of that rule alone. Forget 9, I'd like to play 7. I'm either up 8 or down 8 or whatever, but nobody's in jeopardy. Last year, this is how dumb our sport is. We fought for 50 years to get on national television. The real channels, right? The big ones, the parent company. We put an Oklahoma game on ABC. I'll never forget it. I was watching it, some nice establishment, enjoying a very nice beverage. And Oklahoma goes up 9-1 and the game ends. We waited 50 years, packed house, nobody's in jeopardy, everybody's fine, great time. The game ends, everybody's looking around like, why did we stop? Why do we stop? Because we're dumb.
Well, and just to go back to the point of 9 innings versus 7. So we're going to pay people more because they
Right.
coach 2 more innings. I mean,
Then
again,
let's play 9.
we're going to
if
pay
you-
the umps more because they ump 2 more innings.
Right, then let's play 9.
We
Then
spend the
let's,
same amount of time. We are
Right.
spending the same amount of time. When we have a 3-game series, I don't work any less hours because I might have been on the field for 20 minutes less, nor we're paying umpires for their time for 3 days. We should be paying them the same. Umpire for baseball and an umpire for softball should make the same amount of money. Yet that is not happening in college softball.
Well, it's much harder to umpire a softball game. The reentry rule, the DP flex rule. I mean, honestly, the conferences, all of it. I mean, it is much more difficult to manage a softball game from an umpire standpoint than it would be from a baseball standpoint. Purely logistics. I mean, that's just my take.
Yeah,
That's
well,
one of those moving goalposts, Jackie, you
Yes.
were talking about.
yes.
Because that's something that will apply, they can suddenly grab and use to justify with softball, but they haven't realized that a men's basketball and a women's basketball game go the same amount of time and they aren't paying their coaches the same there. So time either does or it doesn't matter. It's just a shell game that shell happened to fit this situation.
Yeah, because I would submit to you that if we just restructure our entire game and said no more doubleheaders, single games at 9 innings, but you're going to pay us the same, you're going to build us the same stadium, and they'd find something else.
Yeah, no, it wasn't that. It really was this.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Well, talk about the investment piece. I think you were the one that said this, Jackie, several years ago. And if you're not, feel free to correct me. But when Minnesota, had their fantastic year, weren't hosting, then followed that up with a host year, sold out in like 7 minutes. I mean, 7 minutes,
Yes.
Tickets were gone. But you talked about the difficulty for getting an administrator to buy in and invest in softball in certain climates because of things of number of games, or so not talking move the season back or anything like that. But how do you, as a softball coach, as great as our product is, growth, television numbers, how do you advocate to your administrators to invest in a softball in general?
I don't think you do. I don't think they're interested in the conversation. I think you go external and shed light on it, and certainly have people help you navigate that, because I will tell you this, there are still people branded troublemakers and losing their jobs, both genders of our sport. Now we have men coaching women and women coaching women, okay? Over just simply not using the right tone of voice on the right day with the right inflection under the right moon, and you are going to be in trouble. And it's a very slippery slope. You need to be savvy and have advice and navigate this thing correctly, or you're gonna fight your way out of a job. Now, there are plenty of women who have lost their jobs over fighting these issues that I'll go to my grave being grateful for. I mean, I certainly stand on their shoulders, no question. And I could give you the names of the people, that fought the battles that allowed for the benefits that I have today. And I would like to think that I'm going to still fight the good fight when I can. But I do think that external light to the right people is a better strategy than internal. I don't think anybody's interested internally. I think they're trapped and institutionalized just like coaches are. I really do.
I think you are at the mercy of who is in your administration, what kind of support you do have. And in speaking with a former college teammate of mine who's very successful in the corporate world, we talked one day about how to get things moving forward. And she said, they really do respond to data. Now, what they do with it may depend and how you pose it, but the data is, doesn't lie, whether it's salaries, whether it's facilities, and at some point being able to subtly point out the inequities of it and so they can see for themselves if this were to come to light. And sometimes you got to push, and then you got to realize I got to back off right now. And that's the hard part, because you shouldn't have to back off with what is right. And I can say that I've only on one occasion gone to the president and said, I will not back off of this, as this issue is well beyond me. And fortunately had the support. But there's no question that can come back to haunt you the minute something doesn't go your way. And it's as simple as a parent or a student athlete who decides that they don't like you because you didn't put them on the field. And we all know some of those horror stories. And it's really the best advice is you have to be strategic, and you need to have legal counsel backing you up. But when you walk in and the verbiage that goes with the law, that's my best advice to people.
I want to say
those guidelines, be able to recite them.
You can strategically also use student athletes, but you have to be very careful that it doesn't look like you're using them as pawns. And then another piece of advice that Gail Blevins gave me a million years ago that I always remember: you have to help them solve your problems too. Like, rarely do I go to an administrator with one of my problems or an issue where I don't have it solved for them or suggestions for solving it. Nobody wants to be around people who just bitch and complain. So if you're just a bitcher and a complainer about your lot in life, that is not a strategy, okay? Nobody wants to be around that. You're just not fun anymore, right? So if you can go in with the data, the Hutch says, And maybe a solution like, okay, I know you said no to my padded wall for 20 years. Okay. All right. But here are some things. It's a rule now, and there's injury prevention and student athlete welfare. Oh, and by the way, I have a donor to pay for it. Or I am willing to get the donor to pay for it. Now that's a different conversation for them. Because sometimes, you have to remember they do have a lot on their plate, a lot of inequities to solve. So I would also, student athletes, yes, can get things done, especially around their health and safety and welfare or whatever, but also solve your administrators' problems for them. Say, okay, here's my issue. This is how I think we can solve it. That's going to go a lot farther than just you being branded the difficult, whiny, bitchy coach, male and female. They just aren't called bitches, but they bitch just as much as we do.
They're passionate.
Yeah, they're passionate.
Which is part of that double standard.
Yeah, I'm a bitch. They're passionate.
That's right. That we run into quite a bit. What you thinking down there, Bristow? What you got?
Gender bias.
Yeah, I was thinking that it, we get fired up. It's been 50 years and I'm listening to us, and it can sound like we're bitching and whining, but I think there has to be that it's just not right yet. It isn't right. And I think you made a great point, Jackie, that they've miniaturized everything because the bases are smaller, but you just scan around and it seems to have to be bigger and more glorious because it's for the boys. Even at a high school, it's like, what the hell? 20 people come, they're all parents, and you don't need bigger, their parents aren't larger. You don't need bigger stands for the high school frickin' parents of a baseball team than a softball team. Like it just starts right there. And I don't know. I think maybe the next generation, God, I hate to even say this because now we're adding 20 more years on it, but the next generation of men will have daughters that are impacted by this, and so they'll see their law differently. But we have to get more women in places of leadership, in places of decision, and that will make the decisions instead of just making the decision that the guy group they're trying to be a part of wants them to make, which is what the hell happens. It takes nerve. I think it takes nerve to be a leader. Little nerve on little issues, big nerve on big issues. You can't bitch about everything, but man, you have to pick some issues that this is the one. And like Jackie said, okay, we're the only sport at our school that doesn't have lights. There's probably a million reasons for it, but that's a fact. We have a porta potty. We don't have restrooms. Jackie knows. And is it right? I don't know, but it's a fact. Now, I have to believe if that fact existed on one of the male team side, that fact wouldn't exist for long. I just have to believe that. And we just need to continue to see it's not right. And you're not just a bitcher because you want things to be right. If you reframe that, maybe you're a leader, maybe you're a fighter, maybe you're a pioneer, maybe you're a different verb than a bitcher. That's going to be their choice of words. I'm choosing a different word because yes, we've stood on the shoulders of the Linda Wells and the Margie Wrights and all Carol Spanks and all the people that had to coach multiple sports, 3 sports where the guy was coaching 1. At least we've maybe dropped that moniker, but I don't know. It's so far to go. Even on our level where, the inequities, there isn't the pile of money down at our level isn't that big, but it's still not divided equally.
And then sometimes
just because they don't think it should be.
Right. And sometimes so much more. My last year as an assistant coach, I had 15 years experience, a doctorate degree, an assistant coach for a very successful program. And the 23-year-old tight ends coach with the football program was making $30,000 more a year than I was. It just seemed just absolutely crazy. And in any way you slice it, any program, any level seemed absolutely crazy. One thing that I think is interesting, and Hutch, love your take on this, the travel inequities. And I know that having the opportunity to charter or do some other things just for the health and safety and mental health of your student athletes has been a big thing. Not every program can do that. They're not doing it for anyone, but the ones that can, how important is it to take care of athletes, holistically, and not just budget dollars and stadiums, but in every way?
Well, I think that what you see, of course, and the men's programs are largely represented by football, which is at our school 130 to 140 guys. Then men's basketball, which is another 15 guys. So right now you're talking about 155 men that are taken care of at a very high level. They basically walk onto a plane, fly, walk off. It's a very different type of style of travel. And you don't necessarily see it for just the men's teams, but you see it for this many men. And what I've seen over many years, and you see it now, we throw some crumbs, to quote Linda Wells, the crumbs are bigger. So women's basketball gets to charter places because they need to have some equity. So they have women represented. That's 15 women, and a largely probably women's volleyball. So they've earmarked a couple of women's sports to make sure it seems like they're attempting to be equitable, when in general, the larger population of men are being taken care of at a very different level. And, is it all necessary? Some of it isn't necessary. I mean, it's just as easy to drive over to Chicago for us as it is to even probably charter. But some of it's the perception of, well, we have taken care of some women. You're just not in that lucky group, so to speak. And again, the bigger question is, are we taking care of the student athletes the same? Because again, as Jackie says, and my mom had 3 boys and 3 girls, we all got the same number of Christmas presents. We all got to eat the same food. And even though I have been told in a court of law that, well, the women don't eat as much as the men, so they don't need as much per diem. And we looked at the lawyer and said, but it still costs the same. Whether I finished the meal or not, it costs the same amount of money to feed these kids. And yet we see some of these supposed revenue sports that are getting fed 3 meals a day in addition to their full scholarships. You can talk about scholarships. 85 men are on full room tuition, room and board, full scholarships, and all the amenities that go with that. Another 15 men in basketball. And there's 90, I did a count, 95 versus 48 women who are on full. And everybody else gets to piecemeal it together. That's a disparity in and of itself that we perpetuate that, well, yeah, but these men need it. We got to do it because they make money. And the reality is they make money, they spend money, and not everybody is really in anything but the red. So there's a lot of myths, and people just keep drinking this Kool-Aid at the highest levels because they don't really bother to take a look at it. It has to be pointed out in an uncomfortable way, or as John Lewis says, we have to make good trouble. And you know what? That's a really difficult place to put any of us in. I don't know if that answered your question.
Well, I think it's great, and just it makes you think, right? Because the scholarship piece is a huge problem, and I've seen numerous articles on what another scholarship decrease for football. I mean, the last one was in, what was it, 73? That's similar date to something else of, from 105 to 85. But what that would do for parity, if you went from 85 to 65, what that could do for college parity, because the pace of budgets, to your point, Jackie, earlier, running it into the ground, if you were a business, it can't keep going. I mean, it just can't. You think about the arms race for facilities, and I don't know.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I had a pretty progressive AD a while ago, and about 12, 15 years ago, he said this is unsustainable. And you know what? Not only was he wrong, it's doubled.
I couldn't agree more.
Salary has doubled, because you know what they decided to do? It's just let boosters in now. So now, when the booster was a devil 5 years ago, you couldn't name the booster was bad. But we had whole sections of the rule book about boosters and what they can and can't do. Now they literally can write a check and pay the players directly or pay the coaches directly. It's a black hole. Not only was he wrong about not being sustainable, it has doubled since that day. It's unbelievable. Nobody ever wants to look at the expense side of any budget. It's just, how do we grow more revenue? And then, but what's really, really interesting is we do grow the revenue by millions and millions, and the gap just keeps getting bigger because we get a dime and they get 90 cents. 90 cents a dime, 90 cents a dime. So you never catch up. We need a whole bunch of women millionaires to come in and start funding these women's teams and see how the other half likes it. I can still am, my mind is still blown why nobody has had a problem with these boosters saying, I'm going to give every male athlete $1,000 a month or $600 a month or $100 a month, or whatever it is, and no women. And then the argument is, well, you know, it's their money. They get to do with it what they want. Really? Where's the oversight? Where's the board of trustees? Nobody has a problem with that? Because now, who do we answer to? If that model is true, who's our boss? Is it your AD? Is it your president? Or is it now the booster? It's the booster. So it's just another goalpost got moved. I swear to God, we still have 10 chapters of the booster's the devil in the manual. They haven't even been able to cross the word booster out of the manual yet before they're paying for everything already. It's unbelievable how fast that changed.
To your point, Jackie, enter the multi-gajillionaire female who starts handing out $2,000 a month now to every female. Holy crap, the department would go bananas. There would be legislation. We can't really have this. We got to, hey, whoa, we got to calm this down.
Is unfair.
Yeah.
No, I'm telling you right now, if it's so fair, let's change places. That's what I always say.
Well, that's the key piece of Title IX legislation. I mean, when you're trying to come up with, I remember Dee Abrahamson telling me this when I was 23. Like when you're trying to come up with, you know, a decision of what is compliance, it's you should be able to trade places at any given time, and everybody has everything they need. Everybody is, you know, taken care of. And so it's just funny because the stadium thing, and I don't know, I think the only stadium I've ever seen softball to baseball that is remotely close is Texas A&M, and it's because baseball was built first. I'm a huge believer they always build the women's facility first, because then they can do whatever they want with the men's. And if I think the place you went, Hutch, is women's was built first. It was all very nice, and then bam, let's blow up this alien spaceship looking baseball stadium. And I mean, but it is just nuts that your point, Jackie, of it should be so easy. It should be so easy. If this locker room is good enough for the women, then let's move our men's baseball team in it, and you know, we're good. Or a comparable size softball team to, you know, team, and we're good. And we're not there. What have I missed? What else do we need to talk about?
I don't know. I feel like we've depressed everybody.
Yeah, we don't want to do that.
We did not intend to depress everybody. It's actually getting better. There's no question it is. And we're about ready to hand the baton over another generation that doesn't know inequity with the way we do. And we can only hope that there'll be just another, you know, we'll pass the baton and those women will get in those offices where they can just, you know, fight some of the battles. More women in politics sitting on these boards, more oversight, more cell phone pictures. It's going to get better, no question about it. And I think that coaches right now have done as good a job as possible to not let this get to the front porch of our players. Like, I promise you this, none of my players are even remotely aware of any of this, nor are Hutch's. Cindy's maybe a little more because they have to walk 17 flights of stairs to pee, but still, we all do a great job to provide a great experience. for our kids. And that is our job, right? Our job is to fight the battle, but then when we're with our players, that we give them the best experience possible. But we can't not call it out, because then I think that's really disrespectful to the people who came before us, that fought the good fight for us and paid a very high price to do it. So I do think it's hopeful. There's been a little bit more of a, I don't know, call it out as it really is right now, but it still can be hopeful. I mean, a lot of groups right now are, it's a change in our culture in the country, right? I'd like to think we can do better in the social injustice area. And the only way that has changed was the cell phone. Like, right, none of these social injustice issues would be talked about or changing if it wasn't for the cell phone video. So change is coming, and and I'm hopeful.
Well, we've had a lot of change. I mean, we have definitely gone to heights that I could have never even begun to foresee. But I do think we've been taught, even today's world, who is a little bit more immune to the inequities, because some of us had a history lesson growing up, and to recognize that it is important. If it isn't important, it's important that we have equity in the world, that we have social justice. And so I think all leaders in any leadership position have to pay attention. We all should be grateful for what we have. I'm grateful every day for when I walk onto Alumni Field. I am always grateful because I know what it used to be. But it doesn't mean I have to settle. And I think we have to balance between settling, pushing, and all the things that go with it. I have a number of people send me texts and thanks for speaking out, or thanks for what you've done. I'm like, the torch is now yours. The torch goes on, and people carried it before us. People need to continue and find a way to get to the end game, which is just, we're all the same. We should all be treated the same. We should all be able to switch places and not know the difference. We should all have bathrooms. We should all have bathrooms in our dugouts, period. We should play in facilities that have bathrooms in the dugouts. The game is outgrown rec fields. And baseball would never go to a rec field to play in a big tournament for TV because they can't. We do it because we tolerate it. And I suggest we find a way to go to all the massive stadiums that we have and have TV there and play all these fantastic tournaments, and we'll still have fantastic environments. And we shouldn't be at rec fields that aren't as well maintained, that don't have bathrooms, and that you can't even get to the bathroom during the game because there's so many, it's so overgrown. And it's a great thing that we've outgrown all this. We've outgrown a lot of it. We've outgrown some of our stadiums. We need bigger and better. So I think we need to celebrate that and continue to push for that we've outgrown, our game's grown fantastically.
And those things don't have to be mutually exclusive.
Mm-mm.
You can have that appreciation and still, have a quest for excellence and just a higher level. We did a podcast a few weeks ago with Jill Zwagerman, and she was talking about how it's a coach's job to advocate for the program, right? That's your job. And so there's risk that's involved. And Jackie, you're absolutely right. And got a great story for that when the camera goes off. But, one thing she said at the end was, if you don't name it and label it and talk about it, that your student athletes will see the inequities, they will feel them, and they will fester and they will fester. And then it becomes your problem, because it becomes the coach not taking care of the student athletes. And the student athletes can't get to the point internally where they find the discrepancies happening with administrators and with policies. And they just see that their coach is feeding them Wendy's and that this sports team coach isn't. And so it becomes this problem. And then, to your point, Hutch, on the gender bias and the double standard, if you're a female coach, and, there's so many things, but I thought that was really interesting, of the gray area that we don't even see, that you're trying to do the best you can for your student athletes. And because you're not in front of it talking about it. Here it is. Yeah, I know exactly what's going on, and you do too. The effect it could have. I just thought that was really interesting. I'd never thought about it in that way before.
Joanna, I think one thing that we could do better is get our student athletes to have a presence when they leave, when they go out in the world and they get their jobs, to be donors to the softball team, to be donors to the athletic department, so they have some sway, to try and get on the board of regents, to make their way into the decision-making canal, so that they can start to influence the future in ways other than just that have been available to us up till now, which is basically trying to infiltrate legislation and complaining about it. But when you're writing the check, you have a lot of decision-making sway that if you're not writing it, you don't. And a lot of check writers to this point have been male, and not enough have been female. And we can get our women, when they leave, to feel an obligation, or not an obligation in a bad way, but pride, and saying, I'm going to give back, and I'm going to be a decision maker for those that come next.
Absolutely. Great point. Anything else that you all have that you want to share? Anything you're still thinking about?
I think that I would like to say to anybody out there struggling, or or just kind of don't know where to turn. There are a lot of people out here, and I know the three of us will take your call. We'll take your email. The association is there. We have outstanding legal counsel. The coaching association is there for you. We're happy to help. Sometimes it is helpful just to even have somebody to have a conversation with about. So, reach out, don't suffer in silence. We're all here for each other. I know I certainly didn't get here without having my bubble people or people to help me when I was stuck. And I continue to do that. That's the other thing. We're never done, right? So just reach out and don't suffer in silence as coaches.
Thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate that. And we will have more group Zooms and conversations and things coming up on the NFCA gender equity page. So make sure you jump on that and take a look. Read that Kaplan-Hecker report part 2 if you haven't yet. That's on the gender equity page as well. And if you need anything at all, don't hesitate to reach out. Jacquie, Cindy, Hutch, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, and we will see you all next time.
Next time.